Welcome back, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Julie Dennis, who's from Menopause at Work and has worked with many organisations on helping them to create an environment where menopause can be talked about openly. And personally, I think this is going to be a session that answers a lot of questions. We're starting to get into the sessions that will help you from a practical point of view. What can you do in your organisation? How can you prepare your line managers? And as somebody's just put in chat, how can you support your, mine is starting with symptoms, my line manager is starting with symptoms, and I'm mostly out on the other side. So how can we all support each other through this? And we heard a lot in the employment law section, which I think can feel very, very frightening, because many people, not just in the workplace, don't know anything at all about menopause. So there's a big education piece to do there. So thank you very much for joining us, Julie. I'll hand over to you now. Do keep your questions coming. If you can post them in Q&A, that will be brilliant. And I'll see you shortly, Julie.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Deborah. And I've actually managed to remember to unmute myself at the start of the session rather than having to be reminded, which is a first for me this week. So good morning, everybody. My name is Julie Dennis, and the focus of the session that I'm delivering this morning is going to be focusing on enabling and supporting your managers with regards to menopause at work. Going to be looking at three key areas around one size does not fit all when it comes to menopause and work, digging into performance management, reporting, and reasonable adjustments that actually make a difference, and finishing up with the one thing that you can do as a result of this session to make sure that conversations around menopause continue in the long term in the organisation where you work. One thing I do want to say before I get started, which is for the purposes of this session, I will be using the terms women and woman, but I do intend that to include all trans and non-binary colleagues. The other thing is I don't want this session to be me necessarily talking at you for the next half an hour or so. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, if you have any experiences you'd like to share that you think other people would benefit from, please pop them in the chat as we go along, as I'll be keeping an eye on it throughout this session. And in fact, what I want to do is start with a question for you. Don't worry, it's not difficult. It's a simple yes, no question. And what I'd like you to answer me with is whether you are currently providing, or whether you have in the past given any manager specific menopause training. So just a yes or no in the chat box so I can see it, as to whether your company is already providing menopause training for managers, or whether it's not something you've done yet. So we've got quite a few no's coming up that's really interesting. So we've got more no's than yeses right now. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. Do you think, another question for you, do you think menopause training for managers should be mandatory? So whether you're delivering it or not yet, do you think menopause training for managers should be mandatory? Okay, we've got a number of yeses coming through here, and that's really, really good to hear, because I think what I've seen in the past is that manager training for menopause tends to be on a voluntary basis, which means that people that turn up to your session are typically the people who are already on board with your manager training, when actually the people that you want in your sessions are maybe the ones who are less convinced. So yeah, manager training for menopause should be mandatory, I think, within organisations. But different organisations approach it in different ways, and that's absolutely fine, because like I said, really one size does not fit all. You know, I've been partnering with organisations across the public and private sector for the last kind of 4 to 5 years. Big organisations that you'll have heard of, like the House of Lords and Sellafield and the Coal Authority and Royal London and AstraZeneca, and a number of smaller organisations whose names you might not recognise, like HS and Rafferty or Golden Lane Housing or Leonard Cheshire. But what is apparent to me across all these organisations, big and small, whatever industry they're in, is that there really is no one size fits all. because the menopause training that you deliver in your organization has got to be aligned with your values, your business priorities, and your culture, and delivered in a way that's familiar and accessible for your people. Not only that, it needs to be a strategic, integrated program involving all relevant parts of your business, i.e. not just led by HR or wellbeing or EDI, but a collaborative approach across all those groups so that you end up with consistent messaging, support, and inclusivity across all your training, delivery, and materials. Now, whilst one size doesn't fit all, in my experience, there are 6 key areas that you should be focusing on as an organisation. And my menopause inclusion framework is designed to support organisations like yours that are committed to creating positive behaviours and conversations around menopause so that you become known as a great place to work. Now, the stream that we're focusing on today is educate, or for this session at least, my session is educate, which is around educating your managers and leaders who need to be up to speed with the business case. They need to be able to meet legal requirements, consider reasonable adjustments, and most importantly, they need to be able to talk about menopause with relative ease so that people feel comfortable approaching them, everybody can be themselves and work to their best of their ability through all career stages and all life stages. Now, I will only be focusing on the educate square today. If you're interested in the wider details of my menopause inclusion framework, please do come and find me on LinkedIn, Julie Dennis on LinkedIn. Hit me up with a quick message and I will send you a quick copy and overview of the full menopause inclusion framework. But back to educating managers, which is what we're focusing on today. So why do we even need to educate them? Well, there's 3 key reasons, really. The first is around risk, or at least managing risk. As we've heard from JOG, we do currently have general protection under the 2010 Equality Act for women working through menopause, but that protection may become more specific in coming years because of the ongoing government inquiry. But the last thing that you want as an organisation is an employment tribunal landing in your lap. So that's why it's really important to educate your managers so they understand the importance of menopause and how it can impact people in the workplace. Secondly, the reason is around retention. A recent Bupa survey, 2019, I think it was, said that we reckon about nearly 900,000 women have left the workplace so far because of their difficulty working through menopause and the difficulty accessing support. You do not want to be losing experienced and expert members of staff simply because you haven't been able to put a menopause framework in place to support them. And the third piece is around reputation, because when you create an environment where it's okay to talk about sensitive topics like menopause, you are enhancing feelings of inclusion and belonging, and you really do set yourself apart as an employer of choice, both for the people who are already working with you and for your future employees too. So educate your managers for 3 very compelling reasons: to mitigate risk, to improve and retain excellent staff, so improve retention levels, and also to set yourself apart as an employer of choice. Now, what do your managers need to know? Well, what do they tell you that they need to know? You know, I can tell you what I think they need to know, and you may have some ideas about it too. But I think it's really important to engage with your internal stakeholders throughout all stages of your menopause program and ask them what they need too. Now, when I deliver manager-specific menopause trainings, one of the questions that I always ask around the start is, you know, how do you feel about menopause to the managers? How well educated do you feel? How comfortable, confident do you feel about the topic? What are your feelings at the start of this training session? And I'm just going to share some of their answers with you now, and I'm going to let you read these. And we shouldn't be surprised by these answers, because at no point in our lives, right, are we given information on menopause. We're certainly not taught about it at school, or we weren't when we were at school, although it is being added to the national curriculum now. So why should managers be up to speed on menopause if they don't get specific training, when very often those of us who are experiencing menopause ourselves don't really understand what's going on? Now, by the way, I asked them that same question at the end of the training sessions, and the answers are very different by then, at which point they're feeling much more educated, informed and confident and happy that they will be able to support any team members working through menopause. But how do you get them to that place from where they are absolutely baffled by being asked to attend a manager training, where they're scared of saying the wrong thing, where they're worried about their lack of knowledge, to the point where they are confident that they can support people and team members working through menopause? Well, what you need to do really is give them three things. So first of all, you have to provide your managers with knowledge, with evidence-based knowledge around what menopause is, how it can impact different groups in the workplace. And this goes back to the one size fits all, because menopause is a very unique experience for each of us. You know, my experience of menopause is going to be very different from Deborah's, from Jog's, from the lovely Kieran's, who is hosting this session today. Menopause affects people of all ages, genders, identities, backgrounds and beliefs. And we really need to get away from this view that menopause is something that just happens to women of a certain age. But unless we equip our managers with knowledge, they're not going to understand that actually it's a much broader topic. The other thing that you need to give your managers are tools, tools to help them to retain the information that they learn in their training session and enable them to apply what they've learned in the workplace. So examples include manager guidance system, menopause manager guidances, risk assessments, confidential discussion templates. Online training is becoming more popular, and reasonable adjustments too, understanding what reasonable adjustments can work in the workplace. And we'll be looking a bit closer at those shortly. But the most important thing that your managers need is confidence. Confidence to talk about a topic that we traditionally haven't spoken about and they may have never spoken about before. And that confidence comes about from an increase in the knowledge, from access to those tools, and a realization that actually talking about menopause with a team member doesn't have to be any different from talking about topics like bereavement, divorce, maternity, fibromyalgia, or anything else that somebody at work may be experiencing and just needs some support to get through that phase in their life. Now, in terms of the training and support that you provide for your managers, it's critical, it's interactive. So there has to be a live element. So like I said, I know online training, e-modules are becoming more and more popular, and they do have a role to play, but critically you need to have a live and interactive element to your training, especially for that confidence piece. So managers get used to saying that word menopause out loud in a sentence, so they have the opportunity to role play and they have the opportunity to ask questions and discuss their concerns and worries and challenges in a psychologically safe environment. The training support that you provide for your managers needs to be accessible, because managers are different too. There's no one size fits all when it comes to managers. So make sure it is a mix of interactive, backed up with documentation, videos, audios, with key points of contacts within your organization, because managers learn and require support in different ways too as individuals. And finally, the training and support needs to be relevant, by which I mean make sure it's refreshed on a regular basis, because menopause is an emerging topic, right? And thinking around menopause is changing all the time. When I first started doing this work about 4 years ago, it was very much focused around women and women's health in the workplace, whereas now we know that menopause is much broader than that, and that it will directly or indirectly affect every single person in the workplace. So make sure that your training is continually updated. So let's celebrate difference. Companies are different, experiences of menopause are different, and managers differ too. And when we recognize, cater for and celebrate difference. You enhance those feelings of inclusion and belonging that make your organization a great place to work. So one size doesn't fit all, but that's absolutely okay because it gives you the opportunity to celebrate difference. Okay, what are we looking at now? So performance management, reporting, and reasonable adjustments. What I want to do now is dig a little deeper into some of those tools that managers need so they can support their staff working through menopause and ensure that we all stay as healthy, happy, and engaged as possible. Now, one thing that we do know when it comes to menopause and work is that it's a two-way street. So your symptoms can affect your ability to do your job as well as you'd like to be able to. And equally, your work can affect your symptoms for better or for worse. And I'm not just talking about the physical environment, you know, in terms of the temperature or ventilation or noise pollution or access to natural light. But I'm talking about the underpinning culture of the organization where you work and how okay or not it is to talk about subjects like menopause. And one of the things that I was asked to touch on today was around performance management and menopause at work, and how to have a discussion about menopause between a manager and a member of staff. So when it comes to performance management and menopause, what we're really talking about here is how to have a conversation. And I can't emphasize the importance of, I can't emphasize enough the importance of ongoing dialogue rather than a once a year performance management process. So another quick question for you. How comfortable would you feel having a conversation about menopause at work on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, I'm not really ready to do that now, and number 10 being, yep, I would have no problem talking about menopause at work at all. So just in the chat box on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable would you feel having a conversation about menopause at work? Oh, we've got quite a big range of numbers coming in here. So I'm just putting 8.5. I love that you're so specific. So we've got numbers ranging from 2 to 10, which is not unusual. I did get a 0 once. That's the lowest result that I've ever had. Everybody feels differently about talking about menopause at work. And often it depends on, it depends who you're imagining that you would be talking to. So there's quite a few of you there who would feel okay. There's a number of you there in the 6s and 7s and 8s and even a few 10s. But how many of you have actually had a conversation about menopause at work, say within the last 7 days? Just a yes or no. How many of you have had a conversation about menopause at work in the last 7 days? Okay, so we've got a mix of yeses and nos coming through here. Probably more nos than yeses. Hopefully that is going to change after you all come off this conference here today. Now, when I'm training managers, we actually spend quite a lot of time on how to have a conversation about menopause with a team member, because it really is one of the most important elements of success for both the manager, the employee, and your company. Now, I haven't got time to talk you through the whole confident conversation framework today, but what I do want to do is share what I consider to be some of the highlights. So first of all, it needs to be observation-based. So you are commenting on what you've seen has changed. What a manager is not attempting to do here is outing someone because they're menopausal. For a start, you don't know whether they are menopausal. You know, I think sometimes managers come off menopause training sessions and they tend to see menopausal people everywhere because you've been talking about them for an hour or so. But actually, unless someone chooses to disclose they're menopausal, you don't know if that is actually the case. So what you are not doing is having a conversation about menopause. What you're doing is having a conversation about what you have seen has changed. So for example, you always used to be a very punctual employee to all meetings, but actually recently I've noticed that you have been arriving late. Is there something going on? We always used to get excellent feedback about you from our clients and customers, but actually recently some of that feedback hasn't been so positive. Is there something going on? So comment on what you've seen has changed, and then give your team member the opportunity to explain what's going on, remembering that if they don't want to disclose their menopausal, they absolutely don't have to, but also in recognizing that the more honest and open everybody is within these conversations, the easier it is then to resolve. So make sure the conversation is observation based. Also ensure that it's solution focused. And this is something that you would solve together. You know, the onus isn't on either party 100% to come up with a solution to resolve whatever challenges going on, but it's something that can come about through ongoing dialogue, honesty and discussion. And you can consider reasonable adjustments. That's where this piece comes in. And as I said, we'll be looking at those in a moment. But the idea is to have a two-way dialogue as to what can be done to ensure that the team member can continue to do their job to the best of their ability. And the third piece that's important is the follow-up. You know, this isn't just a one-off conversation. So if you find something that's going to help your team member get back on track with work, then make sure that you get a follow-up in the diary for 4 to 6 weeks' time to make sure that it's working. And if it is working, does that adjustment need to stay in place? And if it isn't working, what can you try instead? So how to have a conversation around menopause is to be observation-based, solution-focused, and keep that dialogue going. What we're not doing here is outing someone for being menopausal. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about with regards to manager training and menopause is around reporting. Because we've seen an increasing number of organisations, especially over the last 18 months, introducing menopause programmes and policies, which is absolutely brilliant. But what we hear less about are measurable objectives and demonstrating ROI. And actually that demonstrating ROI piece is really important, especially if you're involved in regular conversations with budget holders. But metrics matter, okay? Metrics matter, and you should be looking at both quantitative and qualitative data. And there's a little bit more around metrics in my inclusion framework if you've asked me, which you'll get from me if you've connected with me on LinkedIn. But the metric that I'm going to talk about now is around menopause-related absences and measuring menopause-related absences. So first of all, in order to be able to manage this, your managers need clarity on how your organisation is managing or assessing menopause-related absences and recording them. So are they exempt from the Bradford factor, for example? Are you treating menopause-related absences as a long-term health condition that meets the definition under the Equality Act, which would be my recommendation, by the way, as it was JOGS earlier, but not every organisation does. So your manager needs clarity on how you are recording menopause-related absences. Secondly, I'd recommend that you add menopause to your absence management system as a drop-down to help track normalisation and to encourage transparency. When you add menopause as a drop-down to your absence management system, it's not simply about, gathering data as to how many days a person is having off sick, but rather it's about encouraging transparency, encouraging whole self behaviour, and empowering people to say, menopause is why I'm not at work today, as well as providing measurable data with regards to days lost through menopause, which you can track over time. So that transparency piece is really important. Just a question, does anybody know actually whether they've got menopause as a drop down in their absence management system at work? Just yes, no, or don't know in the chat box. Got a no come up? No, 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 no. Got a yes, don't know. So only one yes out of all the answers there. I would say that was worth a review, or at least a discussion within your workplace, because it really is an important metric to measure, not just from the days lost perspective, but in terms of how comfortable people are saying menopause is why I'm not at work today. Okay, reasonable adjustments. These are going to look familiar for you to you. Jog had something up similar during her presentation, and actually these are commonly found all over the internet if you look up reasonable adjustments for menopause. Do they seem reasonable to you? Yes or no in the chat box if these adjustments seem reasonable to you. Have a quick look through. Is there anything there that you're uncertain about or you think is missing? Okay, most of you saying, yeah, or pretty much everyone so far is saying, yes, these seem, aha, there's a better answer, depending on the workplace. Absolutely right. Because there's no one size fits all when it comes to reasonable adjustments either, right? You know, a fan is not going to help an active firefighter having a hot flush when she's out on a call. A quiet workplace isn't the answer for everyone with brain fog or having difficulty concentrating or with anxiety, especially if you are working in a busy call center or from a noisy household, which a lot of us have had to do after the last 18 months or so. And actually being near a bathroom isn't always useful if you're experiencing very heavy flooding, because you probably still won't have time to get to that bathroom. So these reasonable adjustments are very suggested and they're very general. So my and somebody's saying that not suitable for staff on our production lines. So my advice to you is that it's important to analyze the roles within your organization, and rather than providing your managers with a kind of general list of reasonable adjustments that you might have copied off a menopause template or guidance on the document, that you provide them with a list of reasonable adjustments that are relevant to the people who are working in their teams. The other thing I would say is not to focus too heavily on related adjustments to the physical working environment, because actually with COVID and the hybrid working environment we're seeing for a lot of people now, that means the managers don't have any control over the physical environment of some of their staff and where they're working, if they're working from home or if they're out and about on other client sites or maybe visiting people at home too. So those are the suggested reasonable adjustments. What I want to do is give you some other options of reasonable adjustments. Adjustments, I think, that can make a much bigger difference for you to discuss with your managers. Recommending that they provide regular opportunities with team members to discuss any concerns or difficulties, not just as part of a performance management process and not specific to menopause, but that your manager has an open door or virtual open door policy. That they discuss practical work strategies to assist with symptoms like brain fog, anxiety, and fatigue, whether that's the creation of departmental procedural documents, note-taking, regular sharing of information, or taking regular breaks, or being able to leave somewhere like a production line when it's safe to do so, that is sometimes outside of the regular break that's been assigned to you. And consider a workplace buddy. And I really like this one because there will be people within your organization who've already gone through menopause. And we had a comment in the chat box about this right at the start to say, how can staff support their managers with regards to menopause? Well, consider offering yourself up as a workplace buddy. If you've been through menopause at work, if you've had adjustments put in place, if you know what it's like and you're out on the other side, volunteer to buddy up with people who are at the start of their menopause journey, who are uncertain, who are unsure, and could do with a voice of experience for someone who has been through it and come out successfully and happily on the other side. Do they sound a little bit more reasonable to you, or at least more flexible when it comes to adjustments? Again, just yes or no, or not sure if you feel that way in the chat box, so that I know I'm on the right lines here. Great, we've got some yeses coming through. So try and, what's that old phrase? Think out the box when it comes to reasonable adjustments, and don't just copy and paste the reasonable adjustments that you find that are available online. Think very carefully about what is appropriate within your work environment. Engage with your stakeholders at the outset, really, so that you deliver what they actually need and that everybody gets a great learning experience. And as I said, which is most important, you become known as a great place to work. So finally today, the one thing. And this is about accountability. I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of training sessions over the years. And when I'm in the training session, I get great ideas, I get excited, I'm really keen to implement and change things when I get back to work. But actually, as soon as the training session's over, you go back to work and you get distracted by other priorities and emails and voicemails, and all those good intentions that you have kind of fade away. So even though this is a conference rather than a training session, what I'm still going to do, and what I always do in my training sessions, is to introduce some accountability now, so that when you leave here today, you know what you're going to do to make a difference. So what one thing are you going to do differently, or starting, if it's the start of your journey, when it comes to supporting and training managers within your organization around menopause? And I want you to pop it in the chat box now, so that you feel accountable to yourself. Are you going to suggest that manager training is mandatory, whether it's already been introduced or not? Are you going to make sure that you've got an accessible manager toolkit that suits everybody's learning style? Are you going to check your reasonable adjustments guidance to make sure that it really is relevant to the roles in your workplace? Or perhaps you're going to set up a focus group with some of your managers to ensure that you put the right training in place. Just pop your accountability piece into the chat bot, please, so that I know that after this conference is over today, you're going to have an idea of at least one thing that you're going to do to embed menopause as a mainstream conversation within your organization. Okay, so what have we got coming through here? Oh, we've got some brilliant stuff. So create a buddy system, ensure that the training is mandatory, launch a policy, share recordings, implement a manager toolkit, make sure reasonable adjustments are specific within their teams. That is so important. Providing a session on our people managers call, implement a manager toolkit, everybody. So you've written that in the chat box. Make sure you now write that in your notebook at home, and that you follow up on it first thing tomorrow morning. Thank you very much for sharing that, everybody. So just a reminder, once again, the Menopause Inclusion Framework for your organisation, if you'd like to know more about that, come hit me up on LinkedIn, and I will happily send you over a copy and an outline of that, because we've just covered the education piece today. But otherwise, I am going to be quiet now and stop sharing my screen, and then we will chat with Deborah and go through any questions that we've had. Hi, Deborah.
Thank you very much. That was a fabulous overview there, Julie, and lots of tips for people to get started. Love the fact that you've already started to think about what are you going to do next. So this is the first of our practical sessions today. We have got some questions, Julie, of course. Right. And you met reasonable adjustment seems to be one that was one of the latter things that you talked about. And one was, this is from your experience, what would be a reasonable adjustment for someone with behavioural changes, i.e. non-engagement? I'm sure we've all seen this one many times. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and we touched on this earlier, actually, when you were speaking with Jog, when people just, so you mean when people just won't engage on the topic at all? Yeah, and so if people don't want to talk about menopause, they absolutely don't have to. But if there are issues with their performance at work, then that is something that they have to enter into a discussion with. So it's talking about what you have noticed that has changed. What are the challenges that person is experiencing? So if it's a behavioural change, though, if mood swings, for example, I've done a lot of work with airlines, and one of the things that they've noticed in their customer service centre is that customer service representatives who in the past have been really good and helpful and patient are actually starting to be a bit rude to customers. And part of that is because of not because of the pandemic, clearly, and the stress around airline travel, but because of the hormonal changes. And one of the things they've done there is they got people to monitor when their moods were dipping, and there would be a pattern. And once you'd identified what that pattern was, what they let those people do was come off the phones for that particular period, and were given an alternative admin task to be getting on with. And when they knew that their moods were then back to a place where they'd be able to deliver good service, they're popped back on the phones again. But it really is about talking about what you've seen has changed and asking your employee how you can address that. So keeping those lines of dialogue open.
But this is a challenge, isn't it? Because when you're in a workplace environment, and I know from the years of training that we've done, so many people do not know that they are menopausal. So if I think of the categories of people that come to our colleague sessions, there are those that are that come to it thinking menopause is on the horizon. I should probably go to this one. And as soon as they see the symptom slide, they realise it's not on the horizon. They're in it.
Aha moment,
aha moment. Or those that are in menopause, they know it, but they don't necessarily recognise all of the symptoms. Or those that are gritting the teeth thinking, this is just something I've got to struggle through. So, the reality when you're starting that conversation is they may not even realise that they're menopausal.
Yeah, that's why the type of training that you and I do, Deborah, is so important. There's the manager training is super important, but those awareness sessions are important too, because why would we know what menopause would be? As we've said from the start today, we haven't been given any information on it previously, which is why we're having to plug this gap in the workplace now. So when you have awareness sessions delivered within your workplace, it does help people to recognise what might be going on with them. It also gives them the benefit of shared experience and the understanding that actually no, they're not alone, because menopause can be a really lonely place, which is ridiculous considering how many of us are going through it.
Absolutely. And I think the extra element is helping them understand what they can do. So many think that they have to struggle through this. And when you start to explain that actually there are some options of managing your menopause and thinking about long-term health, and you said it during your session, often reasonable adjustments are only required for a short amount of time and are often no cost, zero cost, just while they get the symptoms under control.
Yeah, and I think the concern for organisations and managers is that reasonable adjustments are going to be expensive, they're going to be disruptive, they're going to annoy the other people in the team, but actually that's not the case at all. And often the reasonable adjustments that are available are beneficial to everybody in the team. So, going back to that access to a bathroom thing, especially if you need to pee all the time, which is one of the things that happened to me for quite a while. Actually, guys with prostate problems need to go to the toilet on a regular basis, and when they need to go, they can't wait. So moving people around the workplace, if they're actually in a working environment, is beneficial for everyone. We're not singling out a specific population here. We're making the workplace great for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think one of the tips that our experience told us of training line managers is we can suggest reasonable adjustments. We can say this might be helpful for this. Excuse me. But one of the things that we identified pretty early on is it's a really good exercise to run with line managers to say explain the symptoms and then say, what do you think would be helpful for your colleagues? Because they know the roles, they know the type of work. And actually our experience is they come up with things that we wouldn't have necessarily have thought of because they're and in doing that exercise, they're actually bought into that solution. I know working with one of the major supermarkets, what came up on their reasonable adjustment list for hot flushes was replenishing the freezer aisle, and the colleagues loved it. So that was something
I love that. Everybody in menopause wants to work on the freezer aisle. That's a brilliant adjustment.
One of those things that we would never have thought about, but it was a practical solution that worked for everybody, didn't cost anything, and just worked. So reasonable adjustments. You called it thinking out of the box, but giving line managers the opportunity to engage with that and get into some sort of problem solving.
Yeah, so can I just address one of the comments that's come up in the chat there, which is around using metrics will potentially discourage women from talking about menopause in the workplace, and that conversations should be confidential. Yes, they absolutely should be confidential. Unless there's a safeguarding issue, any conversation between a manager and their team member around menopause should be confidential. But what you can do is to pull out themes. So there'll be specific themes that come up over and over again from the conversations that between managers and team members, from conversations that menopause champions may have, or from focus groups. So that's one of the things you can do, track by themes. But absolutely right, you do not identify anyone unless they've given their explicit permission that that's okay to do so.
Thank you very much. Can I ask, focus on something that came up earlier as well, which was engaging men.
Yeah.
This is one that we hear a lot. So would you like to sort of share your experience on how you've engaged men? Because well, I'll let you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure you found exactly the same, that actually men want to be engaged, right? There's this myth that men don't want to know about menopause, that they don't want to talk about it. And, you know, if you're not careful, some, you know, private menopause groups become like a man bashing session. But actually, that's not true. Every man that I've spoken to, well, 99.9%, is open to conversations about menopause. They just don't necessarily think that they're welcome in that conversation. They're worried about saying the wrong thing, or they're concerned that their presence will stop women going through menopause actually talking about it. So the way to overcome this is initially with strategic communications. So if you are running a menopause awareness session and it's open to everyone, which it should be really from the start, because it's an inclusive topic, exactly the same way that mental health is open to everyone, your communications cascade to promote the session has got to be targeted. So that's why we provide communication templates to make sure that your sessions aren't just filled with women experiencing symptoms, because while they will find those sessions useful, what will be way more useful to you as an organization is to bring everybody into the organization. So targeted communications, and sometimes one-to-one conversations. So if you have male influencers within your organizations, and these don't have to be people at a senior level, but you know, the popular guy in the office that everybody likes, and if he's doing something, other people think, oh, well, maybe I'll go along to that too. Have a chat to them on a one-to-one basis, explain why you think the session would be beneficial to them, and then ask them to promote the session too. So targeted comms and one-to-one conversations.
Absolutely. We found the same thing. It was the easiest way to fill a room when somebody sent out an email saying, I thought I knew about menopause. I didn't. This was a great session. But also getting those senior stakeholders to come along to the sessions as well. And we know we had a board director that sent a note round to his part of the organisation to say, just so you all know, this isn't for women. I'll be there too. Yeah. And immediately, you know, it was a very much 50-50. It was a male-dominated organisation, but it was 50-50 audience group there and delegates there. And that's absolutely key. I agree with you around how you position it. That this is an inclusive subject, it's open to everyone, that the content is not embarrassing in any way. You're talking about it in a matter-of-fact way.
Yeah, I know. I think that's the other thing about guys, isn't it? They're worried that it's going to be like, you know, a gynecological chat and there's going to be a lot of vagina talk. But actually, typically, that's not what, you know, if people want to talk about it, they can, but typically that's not what an awareness session is about. And I ran a session, I think it's a while ago now, everything, you know, it's either pre-COVID or after COVID. It was definitely pre-COVID because it was in person. And it was a lunchtime session. And the rules had been that every female who attended that session had to bring a male colleague with them. And, you know, you could see the kind of male marks on the wall where some of them were being dragged in. But one of the young men came up to me at the start of the session and said, oh, is it okay if I eat my lunch while you're talking? I was like, yeah, sure, that's absolutely fine. He was like, all right, wasn't really sure how gory the session was going to be. So, you know, clearly they got their comms wrong. But he left that session a lot happier than when he started it.
I've seen the inverse, where an organisation made it women only, and the male population said, excuse me, I need to go through this because I'm managing people that are experiencing menopause. Or, you know, we always say that my choose to challenge was everyone needs to be involved, because half of us experience it firsthand, the other half through our relationships, whether that's family members, friends, partners, colleagues. So for them, that was a really interesting learning experience.
Yeah.
We also experience a lot of young adults coming too, because my mum's experiencing this, and how do I support her? So you can actually craft your comms to be extremely inclusive from day one. And, you know, if you face into it like that, then it doesn't have to be a sensitive conversation.
No, it doesn't at all. I mean, you know, you and I talk about it all the time, so it's hard for us to be objective sometimes, but I do get that for some people it's very uncomfortable. You know, even I feel weird talking about menopause when it's my 84-year-old dad asking me how business is going. I was like, oh, don't want to talk about it, you know. So I get that it can feel uncomfortable, but the more you say it, the more you use the word, the quicker it is to normalize it.
So maybe that's something that we can put out as a call to action to everybody that's on this session today. Get used to hearing and saying the word till it does become natural. Yeah. I know it took me a year to get a CEO to say the word menopause without flinching. We got there. And when others can do that, it makes it much more accessible for everybody else. be able to talk about it. So fabulous session, Julie. Well done for all you're doing to getting everybody talking about menopause.
Likewise.
We look forward to seeing you again.